This week on BSD Now, we're back to tell you all about what happened at vBSDCon this last week. We've got an interview with Henning Brauer about OpenBSD's PF firewall and a cool tutorial on how to follow stable or current or different branches of FreeBSD. And always, we got lots of news to cover, so please stay tuned to BSD Now, your weekly place to be, SD. BSD Now, Episode 9, recorded October 30th, 2013. I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Hey, and thanks for being with us this week. We got an exciting show and a lot of news coming at you. Of course, a great tutorial and an interview we did. But first, we just got back from vBSDCon this last weekend, and want to give you a little wrap-up about that. Yeah. So, Alan, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it was really well organized. I guess that helps that VeriSign has an events team and they do other, VeriSign specific events all the time. So they had a lot of experience. It wasn't really their first time, even though it was their first time. But, a BSD conference is quite a bit different than doing a conference where you're trying to promote a product, right? And so it's kind of interesting that way as well.
I got to give them props. They did a good job picking venue, food, you name it. Even the format was good. It was a good enough mixture of a traditional conference with arranged talks and then the unconference stuff where we go do like the speed geeking or the birds of a feather and sit and discuss with other developers. And the social stuff was just really good too. I felt like the hallway track was probably one of the best ones.
Yeah,
I've had in many years.
I missed 2 whole talks because the hallway track was way too interesting to leave.
Yeah, there's just people to talk to everywhere, and interesting things to discuss and problems to be fixed and solved right there. I mean, it was a good show, and it was nice to meet some different people out on the East Coast. Since I know, typically we go up to BSDCon every year, but it was cool to have folks who normally couldn't make that show come out.
Yeah, and also we met a couple of people who this was like their first real exposure to BSD. There were some people that had mostly done Linux, or just people that heard about it through TechSnap or this show and just came out to see what it was about. And I think they had a good time as well, which was really important to us.
Yeah, I hope they left with a good impression of the community and really enjoyed it, because I thought this was an excellent show, and there was probably something for everyone there. Whether you were just getting started or advanced kernel developer, it was just a good time all around.
Yeah, like also the hacker lounge later at night when they just had rooms with power open for people to work on stuff collaboratively. I got a lot of work done there, on top of helping out with some stuff other people were doing and some patches to the BSD installer for Beehive. I also got some help with a personal project of mine, actually advancing the script that runs the PCBSD package replication.
Very cool.
Got a bunch of help making that much more intelligent.
Okay.
And so that was great too. I was up till 4 a.m. the one night working on that.
That's dedication, Al. Yeah. Well, thank you for fixing that up. So does that mean things are faster or sync quicker now?
It's more that it'll be more reliable. There won't be, one node won't fall behind, or it also gives us more control about deciding, this server only has so much space, so let's give it the packages, but not the ISOs or whatever, and things like that.
Well, very cool. Well, props to VeriSign for putting the show on. If they decide to do it again or make it every other year, please do so. And
their initial intention was to make it every other year to trade off with MeetBSD, which is usually on the West Coast. But hopefully it went well, and they decided to keep doing it because I really enjoyed
definitely. And when we get word of when the next one will be and date and time and place, we'll definitely pass the info along. And you should make an effort to be there if you're anywhere near the area, or can catch a flight and get out there. It's a good conference. So, well, that's kind of the wrap-up of the vBSDCon there. But let's get into our headlines for the week. I'm sure there was stuff happening elsewhere in the world, the BSD community. So first up, we got managed services using FreeBSD. So what's this about, Alan?
So the FreeBSD Foundation commissioned a bunch of white papers that kind of talk about how and why you would use FreeBSD to build your product or your service. So this one comes from NYI, which is New York Internet. They're a co-location provider, and they're very popular in the BSD community. And they kind of talk about how for their managed services setup, where that's a company will pay them to deal with all of the IT stuff, right? Rather than just renting the space or renting the servers, they say you also admin our servers for us. And so they have customers like Men's Journal, Rolling Stone, and Us Magazine. And so when those guys want their website managed by you, you have to do a really good job. So they talk about how they use FreeBSD-based solutions, including PF, the FreeBSD port from OpenBSD. Although at vBSDCon, we learned about a lot of really, really nice features coming to the OpenBSD one that we hope will get backported into FreeBSD. CARP, which is actually originally from OpenBSD as well. PF Sync, HA Proxy, FreeBSD's GOM disk mirroring, FreeNAS, ZFS, rsync, jails, and all of that to build a battle-tested solution for running these really high concurrency websites reliably.
So they basically take all the pieces of the puzzle from these different technologies, work them together into one solution?
Yeah, and then tell you how to do it for free.
That is really cool.
So they have all these diagrams that showing how the internet connection comes in, and then CARP balances that across two firewalls. So if one fails, traffic goes to the other. Using PF Sync to sync the firewall state between the two, right? So when a connection goes out, you make the stateful rule to allow the response to come back in. And if you don't have PF Sync, then if you fail over to the second firewall, then that packet will be dropped because the other firewall doesn't have state. So PF Sync allows you to sync the state between the two. And then they have their internal network. And then, they show how their backups work, how, what happens when a power fails on the master, how that actually all flows through and makes it work. And we
got the link right here onto the FreeBSD Foundation site, so definitely check that out after the
that's
show.
One in a series. I think there's already a couple that have come out, and I think there's still more on the way.
Okay.
And they even show how they use CARP with jails to have identical jails on multiple servers and then fail over between them.
Oh, that's really cool. Well, hopefully that becomes a frequent thing then. They post more and more of this as
and they got,
goes on.
Server porn.
Yeah. Okay, very cool.
Yep.
Oh, okay, well, next up we have OpenBSD has boot support for key disk-based crypto volumes.
So what this is in OpenBSD you can boot. You can have soft RAID that's encrypted, kind of like you can in FreeBSD. But if it included your root partition, previously the only way to boot it was by entering a passphrase. But now they've modified their bootloader so that now, if you've encrypted your root volume, you can mount it and basically decrypt it using a key on a USB stick. So now if you can have a USB stick, and when it's plugged into the computer, the machine will be able to boot without prompting for a password.
That's cool. So the only thing decrypted is the bootloader initially, right?
Yeah, so
that's cool.
You're even loading the kernel off of the encrypted partition.
That's actually really, really cool. I wish we had that in FreeBSD with ZFS, because I really don't like having to do a UFS boot.
Well, the way I did it in the patch to FreeBSD's installer that I did, you actually have two ZFS pools.
Two ZFS, so one encrypted, one not.
Yeah, and the non-encrypted one is just /boot, but your kernel's in there, and it's like, well, I kind of wish my kernel could be encrypted and protected from modification as well.
Yeah, and snapped along with the rest of the system.
Exactly.
When you do a root snapshot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, hopefully that maybe is something that's doable in the future.
Yep. Okay. Well, that's really cool. We'll have to take a look at how they implemented that. Sounds neat. Okay. Let's see. Next up, more Dragonfly SMP speedups. Looks like Dylan's been busy there in SMP land on Dragonfly, huh?
Yeah. Basically, every word in the sentence here is linked to a different revision in their their repository about changes he's made, and they've been testing it. They have a 48 processor machine.
Great.
Sounds like a really big AMD. That they've been using to build their D ports, which is the Dragonfly version of FreeBSD ports.
Sure.
And now the machine is able to build more than 1,000 packages an hour.
That's pretty cool. As long as they're not all, little Perl packages, right? Now you get OpenOffice in there and Firefox and Chrome. I'll be excited.
Well, because
that is really cool.
I wonder how that compares to FreeBSD, because I think the main FreeBSD build cluster is 24 cores, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so.
And it can build the entire 23,000 out of the 25 that you can make packages out of.
Less than a day.
I think they're down to 14 hours. Maybe it was 18. They kept getting the number smaller and smaller.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That is
Although at vBSDCon, I was talking to Adrian Chad, and he said there was some problems when you went above 24 processors with some locking stuff. So that
lock order reversals and whatnot. You could end up with a panic system.
Maybe that's the kind of thing that they're dealing with here, solving as much of that contention and locking naughtiness.
Better get it solved now.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just going to keep throwing more cores and more cores on these boxes.
Exactly.
Coming soon.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay, well, that's excellent. So, of course, we'll have the link to the notes on that. So, next up, we have a new series going on about getting to know Port Manager from the FreeBSD Ports Management team.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting. It talks about the individual people behind some of those usernames you see fly by. Sure.
And I guess the first one they started with was Joe Marcus Clark. He's been around for a while on the Ports team, and they interviewed him. Then for the second, we got Bernhard Froelich, who's also the creator of redports.org, which is a very cool site. If you haven't checked that out, if you're a ports committer, you may want to take a look at that. But
it's also interesting, some of the questions they ask. What was your inspiration for using FreeBSD? Who is the first person from the FreeBSD project that you talked to? When you joined, who was your mentor? What was your most embarrassing moment in FreeBSD? Joe says here, probably the first time I broke the whole index. Or
I think we've all done that.
He wrote a release song called Ports Freeze Baby.
That's nice.
But then they also, they get down to do you prefer Vim or Emacs? But also, do you wear boxers or briefs?
Oh gosh.
Okay,
and, maybe a little
your favorite
TMI for FreeBSD development community. But whatever, if that's your bag.
And
very cool.
What mail server do you like? What are your hobbies outside of FreeBSD and all that kind of fun stuff?
Yeah, that's really cool. Putting a little more human face on it, so it's not just this mysterious sports tree that gets magically updated.
I go to a bunch of different conferences and I get to meet a lot of these people, but I can't always meet all of them. And so just getting to know them a little better is always good.
Yeah, that's definitely, again, a really neat topic. I hope they keep that up. So, next bit of news here, something actually personal to us. I guess this last week we hit the top of iTunes on the technology podcast section.
Yes, here's a screenshot of iTunes, and you see we're right front and center of the top row on iTunes.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
That is so cool. But thank you guys for everyone who's subscribed on iTunes, and if you haven't yet, please go do so and push the ratings up. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's actually one of the reasons why people have asked, why is only the audio version available on iTunes? It was to consolidate all of those votes. So that we could get up, if we had the MP3, the OGG, and the high and low res video, the total votes would have been divided and we wouldn't have made the front page. So once we get a little more established, we will add the video feed to iTunes as well. But for now, there's an RSS feed you can grab as well.
See, so if you want the video feed, you have to subscribe to the audio feed. And
yes, you have to keep voting it up, and then we'll add the video for you.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, so that was some great news this week. I was so excited when I saw that go by last night. That was cool. But okay, well, excellent. Well, that's the wrap up for the weekly news. Next up, we're going to have an interview with Henning Brauer of the OpenBSD project. Really cool dude.
Yeah.
And he talked about a whole bunch of stuff.
But mostly when he started rewriting OpenBSD's PF, which is, we actually just saw him this weekend talking about some of the stuff he's done since then. And a lot of really cool stuff. So it's a great interview.
Yeah, so sit back, relax, grab a cup of coffee, and enjoy the interview. We'll catch up to you afterwards.
So this week for our interview, we're joined by Henning Brauer from the OpenBSD project. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for being here, man. It's great to meet up with you in Malta. Thanks for picking me.
Yes.
So we'll go ahead and get ready to start. First of all, give us a little bit of background about yourself, how you got started in OpenBSD. What are some notable things you've done that people maybe have heard of?
Well, I got started in OpenBSD that was 2000 as user or as developer.
Either way.
Both.
Yeah.
User, I don't remember.
Okay.
Must have been 2.6 or 2.7, like a long time ago. It must be around 2000, I think, maybe 99. I do remember the reasoning. We were running Linux machines and web servers and stuff, and we got an attack. And the machine behaved miserably, and I actually recorded the attack traffic. And a colleague told me that they just switched their big-ass name servers to FreeBSD, and that worked much better. I was like, okay, BSDs, why not? Let's have a look. So I looked at the 3 BSDs. NetBSD didn't seem to be interesting. I can't really tell why. Like, it didn't draw my attention back then.
Yeah.
OpenBSD sounded good, and FreeBSD was recommended. So I got a FreeBSD CD set and an OpenBSD CD set. Got the OpenBSD CD set first, played around with it a little. I really liked it, replayed the attack against it. It didn't care, just kept serving stuff. And I liked it so much that I stick to it. And I don't think I even really tried FreeBSD because I liked so much what I saw.
Sure. How different would the world be if the FreeBSD shipped faster?
Right? It just shows. Get your CDs in the mail first.
You never know.
Yeah.
You never know. I mean, it's one of the many things. What would the free software world look like if we didn't have the AT&T lawsuit? You don't know.
Exactly.
As a developer, since I was already running, or worked before running an ISP back then, firewalls obviously were an important place, and so I was running OpenBSD and IPF. We had IPF back then, right? And every evening, that was the busiest time for us back then. Every evening, I would max out the machines, like running at 100% CPU load, and these were not old machines. Like throw hardware at the problem was not really an option. And that was about the same time when PF showed up. So as soon as OpenBSD 3.0 was released, I installed it on the secondary machine, like identical hardware, and adjusted the root set to work with the new PF, and switched over from the IPF box, and it was very fast to crash.
Isn't that the way most times we're the first time on anything?
Yeah. So then I made Daniel Hartmeier, who did the initial cut at PF. And we had a pretty long debugging session, and eventually found the bug. It was something pretty minor, actually, but obviously for my setup it was very important. So then it worked, and the very same machines that were completely loaded and running at 100% CPU every evening handled the same amount of traffic easily at 10% CPU load. I found this quite impressive.
Yeah.
So I wrote a longish email to Whisk at OpenBSD just reporting this, because I was so happy about it, and I got a reply from some dude. You might have heard his name. I think he's called Theo. Basically just asking, do you want to come to our hackathon? Me? Why? So, well, why not? So I went there, and much to my surprise, came back with the commit, bit, access, however you want to call it. And most of my work in OpenBSD over the last, that was 2002, so that's 11 years now. Oh crap. So most of my work has been in PF, but there's a change in how we looked at PF. Like in the early years, all of us hacking on PF, we considered ourselves PF hackers. So we wanted to solve everything in PF. And the longer the core group, like the most active people hacking on PF stayed, obviously including myself, the view changed. So I wouldn't call myself a PF hacker anymore. Like I'd more say I'm a network stack hacker. So it's more the entire picture approach now. So in the early days we tried to solve a couple of things in PF that should not have been solved in PF or in the network stack. So that changed. So the entire approach changed. And aside from PF and other network stack things, I was the one who started BGPD, our BGP implementation. Of course, same reasoning. We were running Zebra, now it's called Quagga, but back then it was called Zebra on OpenBSD, and it was actually horrible. And I patched bugs out of Zebra, well, a lot of bugs out of Zebra, but it was bearable but still bad.
Sure.
And I very well remember being in Calgary, going for beer with Theo. And at some point, when he got me mildly drunk, I made the mistake of mentioning that BGP thing I'm using sucks so much. And I looked at the protocol, and it doesn't seem to be all that hard. And it might be a good idea to write an own BGP daemon. And well, he did not forget that I mentioned that. And eventually, I attempted to, and it worked nicer than I thought. At some point, when I had a kind of working prototype, I poked a few friends who were working in the same area, and Claudio was the one who actually responded. So the two of us kept working on BGPD, and we had a working version within, I think, 3 months or so.
Wow.
Like one that did all the basic BGP stuff that I could use to replace the Zebra work. It was really nice. I did NTPD, our NTP implementation. For BGPD, I did something which, in hindsight, was very, very smart, which is surprising.
Probably weren't drunk when you did that part, right?
No.
Okay.
So, when we're talking about privilege-separated daemons, we're also talking about inter-process communications, of course.
Sure.
And back then, every program, there were not many, were coming up with their own inter-process communications. And I actually sat down and wrote a pretty generic framework. Lowest level is handling non-blocking sockets, handling all the buffering. And on top of that, I wrote a layer for the messaging between the processes. I called this iMessage. Nothing to do with that company.
Yeah.
It's the I was for internal.
Right.
These days it works over TCP sockets. So it's not really internal anymore, but well, it can work over TCP sockets.
Sure.
It doesn't really care what kind of sockets is below, right? And I basically packed up NTPD as a proof of concept that this framework is generic. And I had another developer promising that he'd do the time-related stuff, which I did not want to touch, but well, he disappeared, so I had to write that too.
Sure.
Worked out quite nicely. And the framework is actually the basis for almost every new OpenBSD daemon that showed up in the last 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, so
It
ask
works.
you about that. It's like you kind of did it once, and then all of a sudden it permeated
Of course,
everything.
Of course, it evolved a lot. Like it's not what I wrote 8 years ago anymore.
Right.
Sure.
These days it became a library, or it's in the Butyl now.
Yeah.
And that work was done by others. I think foremost Eric. But I'm glad they did it.
Yeah.
And that worked out quite well.
I would say so.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. So what are you currently hacking on? You got any super secret projects or anything else that you've promised to do to Theo that he's not going to let you forget?
No. I'm not into secretly hacking.
Okay.
I tend to be pretty open on what I'm working.
Sure.
In the last 2 or 3 years, I did 2 big things in parallel, which was a big mistake because they're getting lost in it. I rewrote the checksum handling in the network stack, like BIP checksums, which was relatively simple.
Sure.
And the TCP and UDP checksumming, which is a nightmare.
That's what your talk was about, right? Or-
Yes.
I saw that in Asia.
Yep, basically the same talk again, yes. One of the reasons being that I must refrain from giving a name here, but one of the original BSD developers tended to produce spaghetti code, and that's what the checksum handling is like. So it's basically incomprehensible. And to be fair, it is more complex than it sounds, because I mean, we're talking about a checksum over some kind of data. This is not all that shouldn't be hard, and the checksum algorithm is trivial. Anyway, this turned out to be very complex because, well, it's spaghetti code. It's little bits here and there instead of a nicely contained file with a couple of APIs. So that's one bit that has been committed and is actually in OpenBSD 5.4, which is about to be released.
Yes, I'm going to get my CDs later.
Yeah, this is the first chance anywhere to get the CDs. Like these are the first CDs we are selling of 5.4 before release. And the other thing I've been working on for a couple of years is to replace AllQ, which is the subsystem we use for bandwidth shaping and priority queuing. The new priority queuing system is in tree for a couple of releases already. I actually don't remember for how many. That's a common thing, not remembering when things went in. So the idea being that the priority queuing system is so simple and so low overhead that it's on all the time. And it is. You don't have any way to disable it. And we use it to prioritize a couple of things by default that you want to prioritize, like carb announcements. Like if your link is congested, the last thing you want to do is to drop your carb announcements because then the slave thinks it has to become master, and that's not
smart
a good
having
thing.
those on.
Well, and I said the overhead is close to zero. It's trivial. But that left us with having to replace the bandwidth shaping part. And in AllQ, we had two bandwidth shapers. One's the CDQ, class-based queuing. And about a release later, we added HFSC, hierarchical fair service curves.
Something like that.
And AllQ was a research project in Japan by Kenjiro Show. I think back then he worked for Sony. He's not IJ, whatever. And that was actually his thesis. So it was research, and back then the bandwidth shaping was a hot topic and it was new. So one of the ideas behind AllQ was to have a framework where you can plug different schedulers to figure out which one's the best. But by now we know what to use. It basically is HFSC that everybody's implementing. And ironically, when Kenjiro and I merged AllQ so that it would not use half-merged AllQ into PF, the idea was that we removed AllQ's traffic classifier, which was rather simple, and used PF to classify and set up the queues. And ironically, when I did the HFSC merge, I screwed up the syntax royally, so it's basically unusable. And now, 10 years later, I'm replacing my own work, basically. This is not committed yet, but probably goes in next week. People keep asking me what the name of the new system is. Like I'm saying, it's just the new queuing system.
All right. But new queue.
Henning Q.
Henning Q, HQ.
Since the old one's called Alt Q, and Alt in German means old, people suggested Neu Q, which is new. I'm not into marketing, I don't care, it's the queuing subsystem.
It's the one that works.
And it's actually very simple from the user's perspective. It's very powerful, but as long as you don't need the powerful bits,
then you don't have to deal with it.
Super simple.
Just leave it alone.
Yes, that's the idea. We spent, I can't even say how much, but we spent a couple of hours in front of a whiteboard in Ljubljana. A couple of developers, like 5 to 10, just working on the syntax without computers. Whiteboard and pen, that's how it works.
Right. Well, if you want to write syntax that people are going to be able to do, that's
right.
That's the best way to do it.
Because if you can't sit down and write the syntax on a whiteboard without looking at a computer, then with the syntax it's complicated.
That's right. Well, the first bits on the whiteboard you don't want to see. They were horrible. But a couple of hours later, we had a really, really nice syntax.
Yeah, but it's easy to erase and start over up there as opposed to coding it and finding out a week in that, oh crap, that don't work.
Absolutely. Still took a long time to implement this. The diff is kind of big and it touches many areas. It's like 4,500 lines or so. For some reason, I seem to be incapable of writing diffs that are non-trivial and below 4,000 lines of code.
There you go. Well, that's cool.
I managed to write small diffs, but medium size just doesn't happen for some reason.
It's all or nothing.
Apparently.
That's not a bad way to be.
Doing those two things kind of in parallel was a really, really, really bad idea because it burns you. It really burns you. Both problem spaces are pretty complex, so you're getting lost in them and you forgot pretty much everything about the other. The reason this happened is that one, I didn't think checksums would be such a big deal, and two, at one point I was completely stuck with the checksum diff because there was a bug that I just could not find.
Sure.
And eventually I figured it out. And then, but I already was in the middle of doing the queuing stuff, right? But since I had figured it out, of course I wanted to finish this and get rid of the diff from my trees.
Yeah.
I was in the middle of doing both. I'll try to avoid that in the future.
Well, excellent. Any other questions? I mean, you pretty much gave us
everything we wanted.
Great overview. That was fantastic.
Okay.
It made our job easy.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for providing that service to the community.
Yes.
I keep thinking and saying, the BSD community, obviously for me this is mostly the OpenBSD community because that's what I'm most familiar with, but it's a very important point. It's not just the developers and it's not just the software. There's an entire ecosystem around it, and guys like you helping us, to spread the word or feed users that are interested information in new ways. I mean. We wouldn't do video podcasts, but I'm pretty sure there's plenty of people who like them. I mean, I don't know your visitor numbers or something, but I'm pretty sure it's non-trivial. So this is a service you provide to the community, so thank you.
Oh, we're glad to do it. This has been great. And the next time you have a huge patch and you're ready to commit some new system,
Don't forget to email.
Send us an alert so we can get you on, get you talking about
I usually announce these on Twitter.
Okay, well there we go. We'll keep an eye out.
Just follow Henning Brauer.
Okay.
I already do.
There you go.
Like I often tweet the link to the div and ask people to test, and that actually works.
Yep.
So you said it was Henning Brauer on Twitter? Okay. There you go. You guys know now to go ahead and grab that so you can follow along with us.
Wait a second. Did I just manage to do marketing?
You did.
By accident.
Yes, look at that.
It's okay, it was an accident.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you so much for being on with us today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And that's it for our interview.
In most of the BSDs, you're going to have different branches or versions of the operating system you can use. Oftentimes, in addition to the normal releases, there's a development version with the latest features, things that are being committed that day. In FreeBSD, there's 3 different branches of the OS you can use. Release, which would be your normal dot releases, such as 9.0, 9.1, 9.2. You'll have stable, which is a little bit more aggressive. It's still considered stable, but has more current changes before they hit those point releases. And then current, which is bleeding edge, stuff that just went in 10 minutes ago. So each of these is going to be aimed for a different set of users and their needs, obviously. This tutorial is going to explain the differences between them and why you may or may not want to use a certain one. We're going to be showing you how to go from one to another when possible. And one of the advantages of doing a source upgrade, since it's required for the development branch, is you can easily strip out parts of the OS that you maybe don't want or need. So we'll discuss a little bit more of that as we go on. But let's start with a brief explanation of what each branch is and what it's mainly intended for. So Alan, you want to give us a rundown of what we're going to be looking at here?
Sure. So the most popular branch that people run is for FreeBSD is -release, which is considered the most stable because it's a specific point in time, and then features don't change within the release. All that ever happens is security updates.
Yep.
And for most people, that's actually what they want, right?
Yeah.
So most users would use release and because it's the most thoroughly tested and it's not a moving target. With release, you basically have a version number, like 9.1 or 9.2. With stable, basically you have a date or an SVN revision. Because stable basically changes throughout the day all the time. So often, like in security announcements, you'll see, this is fixed in 9.2 or 9 stable after this date.
Because this commit on that date fixed it.
Because there are no version numbers per se. So if you're running release, the easiest way to update it is just using FreeBSD update, which is the binary update tool. And so FreeBSD update fetch will download all the updates, and install will install them. And as you can see, I just did one, and it updated the latest security release in this virtual machine here. So that's, basically took me from FreeBSD 9.1 release P7 to P8. If I wanted to upgrade, say from 9.1 to 9.2, then you can use FreeBSD update to release 9.2 and just say upgrade.
Yeah, that may take a little longer.
Yeah, this takes a little longer, but it will download the differences and install them and walk you through the process. It's all documented in the handbook as well. But basically, it will update your system, and this is fairly safe. I do this over SSH all the time, even on servers where I don't have console access. So if this were to go wrong, I would the server would be down for quite a while until somebody could, help me fix it or whatever.
Sure.
So yes, I even use FreeBSD update on servers in remote countries and stuff.
Well, one thing to mention here too is if you're doing jails, you can do this inside a jail as well. Even if there's no kernel, it can still update the world and grab the security patches. And when an SSH patch comes down the pike, you may want that in your jail if that's where you're hosting your SSH server.
Yep, and EasyJail automates that, but you can also use it for your manually created jails as well. There's a flag on FreeBSD update, I think it's -B, that lets you set the base directory, so you can update a version of FreeBSD that's in a subdirectory, like a jail.
Sure. Yep, that's very cool.
And so that's about all you really need to do to upgrade your box that's running a release like 9.1 or 9.2. Now, if you're tracking a development branch like stable or current, it gets a little more complicated.
Sure.
I think the first thing people get confused about with the stable branch is the meaning of stable. It doesn't necessarily mean the OS is stable. It means the ABI is stable. It means
correct.
A binary compiled for that for any version of 9 will work on it. Right? So a binary compiled for FreeBSD 9.1 will run on 9.2, will run on 9 stable. So any change that breaks that doesn't go into 9. It has to wait for 10. And so
the only caveat to that would be some ports that require kernel modules or link against the source tree, like VirtualBox is a good example.
Yes,
you still may have to recompile that.
Yeah, because that's specific to the kernel version, and so that's a special case, but most times you don't need it. And so you can run current or stable at a kind of unique time right now in the FreeBSD project that 10 stable and current are not that different, because 10 stable is a copy of current from like 3 weeks ago.
3 weeks ago, yeah.
With some of the newest changes backported in already. But so if you want to learn how to do current, is about the same as doing stable, and the instructions are in the show notes in the tutorial. So we're going to do stable, but it's basically the same thing.
Sure. You're going to be kicking off a source upgrade here, it looks like.
Yeah, so the first thing you need to do is get a Subversion client. Now, there's actually 3 to choose from. You can get full Subversion, which is especially handy if you're a developer and going to be committing changes back or something like that. But most people aren't. So there's also SVN Lite, which is has fewer dependencies. It's kind of like just lighter. And then there's also SVN Up, which doesn't actually use any of the SVN metadata, so it doesn't create little .svn directories. It just downloads the files. It's kind of a replacement for the old CSUp. So anyway, you need one of those, and then you check out a copy of the source tree. So you can see I'm doing here SVN checkout of the nearest mirror for me is SVN 0 US East, and I'm getting the stable 10 branch, which currently is FreeBSD 10
beta 2.
10.0 beta 2. So I'm going to check that out. I've already done that. And then if you do SVN update, it'll download any updates from when you checked it out to now. So that way you don't have to download the whole thing every time. You can just follow what's changed. There are a couple of options you can use here, and most of them are documented in the handbook, and there's also the make file at the top has some comments, but there's also this special file called updating. And if you read it, you can see it's basically reverse date sorted list of changes. So anything
some of them more critical than others.
Yeah, but just things you might want to know about before you upgrade. Sometimes there's special steps that you have to take to be able to upgrade. For example, you can see in the top one here, there was a bug in the FreeBSD update tool that shipped with beta 1 that made it impossible to upgrade to beta 2 unless you followed a certain set of steps. So if you read that errata notice, it'll explain what you can do, and then you'll be able to upgrade successfully.
Yeah, another common one may be there's a new user that got added to the system, like when they brought in Unbound.
Yeah, or
you'll need to run merge master-p to create it or whatever.
Yeah, and
before you install.
Before that, when they added the audit D and audit dist users as well.
Yeah.
Or actually, Hast also had a user, so there's quite a few. So after you read that and do any special steps, you have to then build your source tree. So you can just do, make build world. We'll build the whole world. You might also do a -J for jobs to tell how many makes to run concurrently. Usually you run as many as you have processors to try to get the most speed out of the system as you can without running into contention. And you can also, and then there's build kernel. Once you've done that, like Chris mentioned, there's merge master -P. The P stands for pre, so it doesn't have any steps you have to do before you can install the new world. For example, when you add a new user, part of the reason might be that certain binaries are owned by that user. So you can't install the system if that user doesn't exist because it can't own those binaries.
Can't set them, yeah.
Yeah. So the correct order to do things is to build world and then the kernel, then install that kernel and boot off of it, because these new binaries might not be compatible with your old kernel, and that will break stuff. And so you want to always be running the newest kernel and then the world. So once you've installed the new kernel and rebooted, you can do the merge master pre-step. Once that's done, you can make install world, which will install all of the binaries for the base system. So that's, top, ls, netstat, all the commands.
Everything.
Yep. Yeah. In FreeBSD, the entire operating system comes out of world, except for packages you have. After you do the install world, you can run the regular merge master, and this will update all of your config files, everything under etc, including your password files, but also all the RC startup scripts.
Yep.
They changed the default in login.conf. When they changed the default password encryption or hashing, you had to change a file for that, and it takes care of all of that. And then you can also do make delete old and make delete old libs, and that will get rid of any files that were removed. For example, if you're upgrading from 9 to 10, the older version of the SSL library is there, and you want to clean that up so it doesn't get used. Of course, you want to make sure that none of your binaries are using that first. So if you have packages installed, you want to update them before you remove the old binaries, otherwise they won't be able to start.
Maybe install, compat 8x or compat 9x or something like that too, if you're not going to be able to change those packages.
Normally you deal with upgrading your packages in there as well. So if you're going from 9.x to 9.x, your packages can just stay, except for, like Chris mentioned, anything with the kernel module like VirtualBox will need some special love. But if you're upgrading from 9 to 10 or 8 to 9 or anything like that, then you basically have to recompile or reinstall everything.
It's a good rule of thumb to just reinstall or rebuild it all if you can.
Yeah, exactly. And with package.ng, that's just a matter of editing your pkg.conf and pointing it to a new repository, and it'll just download all the latest versions of everything, and you're good to go. And actually, our FreeBSD update is kicking off now. You can see it's downloading all the patches or all the new files it needs to upgrade 9.1 to 9.2. And when that's done, it'll give me a summary and basically the same steps after you've done the FreeBSD update upgrade command. You do install, and that installs the kernel. Then you reboot, then you do install again, and that will install the new user land. And then if you're doing a major upgrade, then you rebuild all your packages then, and then do install one more time to delete the old libraries. So it's very analogous to doing it from source.
That's essentially the steps we do on PCBSD to upgrade your system as well. It's just running FreeBSD update in the background and doing those steps for you.
Yep. And
one thing you mentioned a little bit, but when you're building the kernel, it's possible to configure your kernel too at build time.
Yes.
There's a good section on that in the handbook.
Right.
I recommend you check out.
And then you can have multiple kernels. Most people, rather than modifying the generic, will make a copy of it and name it something else.
Sure.
So when you're doing the make build kernel and make install kernel, you just set the extra variable on the command line, kernconf, in all uppercase equals, and then the name of your kernel, and that will build and install your custom kernel instead.
Yeah, and the kernel config script's really easy for those who've never tried it. If you're a Linux guy, it's just a flat text file where you list options, what modules you want
and
included. Maybe there's
comments around each one that kind of explain it, and there's also a notes file that has even more detail about a lot of them. And most of the time, there's one specific feature you were trying to add or remove, so it's really simple.
Next up, we have our news roundup. We're going to quickly go through some of the notables from the last week in the BSD community, and we're going to start off with a little OpenBSD news. Looks like they got some support for the Xbox 360 controller.
Yeah, so it shows up as a human interface device, so you can actually use it to play games now.
Wow, so you can fire up your old emulators and play on OpenBSD. That's pretty cool. One of the questions they asked is, are there people who regularly play games on BSD? If so, maybe email us and we can do a segment on it. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
I know I had somebody contact me about they had a Wiimote set up at one point to play some games on PCBSD. I thought that was kind of slick.
Yeah.
Okay. Next item, we have PCBSD. So that's our stuff. The 10 stable ISOs are now out. So this is an extremely early cut of the 10 stable branch. I think the ISO from last week is running beta 1.
Yep.
I'm getting ready to push out a beta 2 ISO. This is not recommended for everybody right now. This is pretty early testing stuff. Yep. We'll release a little bit more general call for testing here in the future once we work out some of the kinks and finish getting packages built for it. We have a full package NG repository now for 10 stable, which you can pull from if you're on FreeBSD or PCBSD.
Nice.
But it is messing quite a number of packages. There's still a number of things that are broken in the tree. But because it's on 10 now, we get the AMD KMS you can start testing. So if you have an AMD video card and want to play with it.
The Intel KMS is updated as well, isn't it?
It is. So if you're running any of those and would like to test them out, this is a great opportunity to do it and see how it works on your system. There's a new text installer built in, so if you, for some reason, don't want to use the graphical text or graphical installer, you can fire it up to text mode and do the installation that way.
Nice. And
we've added support for UEFI in the on the boot DVD, which makes it a combo DVD USB and also has UEFI booting. So it's pretty cool. There's a lot of new stuff in it. Feel free to play with it if you're a hacker or curious, but just don't switch your main system over to it
just yet.
Quite yet. Yeah, give us a few more weeks to work out all the kinks.
So what will the process be like for upgrading like my 9.2 PCBSD to that?
So it'll be pretty much what we showed in the tutorial. We'll be running a FreeBSD update to go from 9.2 to 10 release when that hits. And
then just updating your package NG.
Yep. Cool. And so the way it works is our graphical utilities actually handle all that for you. They will run FreeBSD update. And before they run FreeBSD update, they will pre-cache and download all the 10 packages for the 9 ones you have installed.
Right.
And then when you reboot, we have it set up to automatically run RC scripts, which will then do the install world and install all your new packages, and then just boot you up to the new desktop. So
I'm too used to doing everything by hand.
Yeah. This is going to try and automate it all for you. So you literally just say, okay, apply, wait a bit. It'll say reboot. You reboot, wait a little bit longer, and then it boots up, and you're done.
Nice. Because it's like I was at the conference, I was messing around with the BE admin stuff, and then I got it going, and then I tried the graphical utility. I was like, oh, this is nice. Click.
Yeah, right.
And it had the option I was looking for to change the default timer, because the default was like 2 or 5 seconds, and half the time I wouldn't select the right one in time. Yeah. And now I have 25 seconds, so I always get the right one.
So yeah, that's how we're going to do it, though. It's going to be pretty simple for you. That's part of the reason why we do our own scripts to cache packages from package NG.
Right.
Because we can prefetch everything and make sure you got a complete download. And then if your internet connection goes down during the actual upgrade, like no big deal. We've got all the packages, we've got world, we've got kernel, we're done at that point.
Yeah.
You could pretty much unplug your system from the net.
That's quite helpful.
Yeah. So anyway, that's all coming soon. So stay tuned.
It's also interesting with that super duper ISO you have now that does UEFI, USB, and DVD all at once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've kind of been trying to streamline all of our stuff into one consolidated image, just because it's harder to have to test 4 different images, and this one's broken, that one's not. And USB may have
easier for you to upload one instead of 8.
Yes, very much so, and easier for you guys to download, because now if you want to do a DVD and a USB, you just
don't have to
grab
download
one
2
image
different
and
things.
burn it to whatever media you're going to use. So,
and it's easier for me because I don't have to store as much.
That's right. We were thinking of you, Alan, when we did that.
Yes.
That's a lot of cool new stuff, and I'll be releasing a 9.2 ISO that's actually built with that same method as well here pretty soon.
Will that be the 9 stable?
Yeah, it'll be 9.2. It'll just be an updated version of 9.2 that has the combo ISO USB image. Cool. But it'll be pretty much the same world and kernel and all that.
Yep. Awesome.
Very cool. So stay tuned. Next couple weeks you'll hear more about that.
Awesome.
So next up on our news roundup, we got something about switching from Linux to BSD.
Yeah, it's mostly just a conversation thread over at Reddit with a bunch of interesting stuff, and our audience tends to have quite a few people who have attempted making the switch from Linux to BSD and had experiences with it, and they may be able to help some people that are thinking about it and walk them through it. But I think the biggest thing to remember when you're switching from Linux to BSD is that a lot of the stuff's the same. Like most of the commands you're looking for are going to be there. People always ask about is this utility or this or is this program going to be there? It's like with the ports tree, almost everything's the same. KDE is KDE or GNOME 2 is GNOME 2 or Firefox or Chrome or Firefox and Chrome,
Apache or whatever.
Exactly. It's all pretty much the same stuff, and so a lot of it's the same. Especially from a desktop user, it's much harder to tell the difference unless you're looking for something that's very specific to one distro. But beyond that, dropping into a PCBSD desktop doesn't really look much different than an old Kubuntu or something, right?
I mean,
any distro that runs KDE.
It just depends on which window manager you pick, and it'll look like whatever Linux distro you may have used with that same window manager. The differences will be maybe more of our utilities, for maybe wireless config and network and adding users. Some of the things we do differently on BSD, but still, I mean, it should be pretty easy if you're already a Linux GUI guy.
I can't wait to demo that new ZFS utility you have.
Oh, yeah. That's actually pretty cool. Claudio, I don't know if you're out there listening, but that is fantastic.
Yes.
It's a great utility.
It is.
But anyway, if you're a server guy, maybe it's a little different, though. You actually start SSHing in. It's like, okay, I know how to set up Apache, but where do my config files live? How do I package add it?
Technically on FreeBSD, where my config is much easier once you realize how it's done.
Yes, right? I would agree completely.
Every package puts its stuff under user, local, etc., and then usually the name of the app. So your Apache stuff will be under Apache 2.2 or 2.4 or whatever. And so it doesn't, they're not just, thrown all over the place willy-nilly.
Yeah, they don't randomly change at some point. I mean, It's been that way forever, and that's where they're going to stay.
One of the biggest thing that the FreeBSD ports tree does is take all those regular apps. Most of the time there's not much porting that's actually happening, right? Most of the apps will just work out of the box on FreeBSD. It's just applying the FreeBSD rules to them, being installed. Sure. These config files go here.
Your bits go here.
Your example files go over here. Your binaries go over here. Your RC script goes here, and it just works. One of the nicest ones was in 8.1, I think it was. They added the service command for starting and stopping daemons, so you didn't have to. The biggest one is you didn't have to know whether that service was built in or an add-on. Or mostly just it saves you typing /user local etc rc.d/nginx start. You just type
and it
service
might be confusing to a Linux guy if you want to start SSHD and you don't know that SSHD is actually in the world, so it's under etc
rc.d instead. Right.
So you would just run service SSHD and it just finds it and comes up wherever it is.
And it makes sure that the environment is right as well, which was a bit of an issue before.
And then of course the way that we set up config is a little different. You got your etc rc.conf and some different variables in there you can set. honestly, though, if you're already a Linux sysadmin and you're good at the console, you could probably get into the system and within a day or two feel reasonably competent.
There'd be a couple of things you might have to look up in the handbook. But, you'd have the same problem switching to any marginally different Linux distro.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And if you're not going to be doing kernel rebuilds or rebuilding world and you just want to use it and be a consumer.
I think one of the biggest differences in the last couple of years is in FreeBSD is I've never, ever had a need to rebuild my kernel anymore. Like with 4.x, I always had to have a custom kernel for at least like 8 options. But now most of the ones that I would need are kernel modules. I can load ZFS or IPFW or whatever I need as a kernel module.
There's very few that need to be in the kernel now. Yeah. It seems like just about all of them. And you can just put them in rc.conf, load these up at boot.
Or loader.conf, depending if you need it much earlier. But
Yeah. So that's some of the biggest differences. But again, I think if you're a reasonably competent Linux sysadmin, like this isn't going to be a huge deal.
And most of it is actually documented in the handbook. And I think one of the biggest differences you'll notice is the completeness of the man pages.
Yes.
Including, like, there's not just man pages for commands. Like, if you're a C programmer, there's man pages for, like, .c like .h files and everything. Like every system call or the
which comes in handy when
libc and
porting stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
If I find a function, it's like, that I need to find out where's that from. Just man the function.
Well, yes, that was one of the other things. Is a couple of the things that come as separate libraries on Linux are built into the libc on FreeBSD, because it's not glibc, it's libc.
Yep. Okay. Well, that's so. Anyway, that I know we kind of diverged a little bit there, but there was a link there about reading somebody's experience.
The most important thing is once you switch to BSD, you'll never want to switch back.
Yeah, it's a little Hotel California. We don't let you leave, right?
Exactly.
Very cool. Okay, next up we have OpenBSD has announced that they have some support for doing unattended installations now.
Yeah, I can imagine this is
DHCP.
This is Pixie Boot and loader config and do it. I can see this being very useful if you're trying to mass produce little router appliances or anything like that, especially with how awesome OpenBSD's PF is.
Yep, that's very cool. Okay, so it looks like it can do automatic network setup, SSH, passwords, etc.
So it even pulls the config file over HTTP. Awesome. And it's just simple key value pairs. You just say, system hostname equals OpenBSD. And when the prompt in the installer comes up saying, what would you like your system hostname to be? It puts in OpenBSD for you.
Very cool. Yeah. Very cool. So it's still a work in progress, but if that's something you need to do, go ahead and check out the commit in the show notes here. Yeah. See if there's some way you can pull that in and use it in your situation there.
Yeah, it looks really nice.
Okay, and that's the wrap up for the weekly news. Yep. Next up, your feedback and questions. We have questions from you, the audience. Go ahead and send those in. We'll try and answer them the best we can. Yeah. But this week we got a number of questions we'll go ahead and tackle. So first up from, let's see, how did I pronounce that? Kajal?
I think just Cal.
Alexander. So he says he's watching the show and it's given him a lot of motivation to keep using FreeBSD as much as possible. So that is cool. He's looking, I guess, at virtualization with Beehive would be cool, but he doesn't know a lot about it. So he'd like to see a tutorial.
Yeah, it's a little complicated still, but one of the things we were working on in the Hacker Lounge at vBSDCon is this kind of master script to kind of just turn it into a couple of commands to actually get one running.
Sure.
And so as soon as that's in a slightly more usable state and ready for public consumption, it'll be up on beehive.org and we'll do a tutorial on it and walk you through. Part of the other thing is the host has to be running FreeBSD 10 or higher. So,
it's pretty bleeding edge stuff.
That's not actually out yet. Once it is, then we can get into how to do it. But yes.
Right now you can use it to host other FreeBSDs. I think you said Open and some Linuxes.
Yeah, Ubuntu and CentOS are working as far as we can tell. Like, I booted it up and ran like the OpenSSL benchmarks and stuff. So I haven't been able to crash Linux yet.
So it works for me.
Yeah, exactly. And thanks to Chris for help making a port to get that one utility we needed ready.
I'm still working on it. We'll hopefully have a
it sounds
port here
like-
shortly
exactly.
that in the tree that'll let you easily boot up OpenBSD
and so
Linux with grub.
The developers are working very furiously on this, but there's always little bits missing, and so a bunch of us are trying to offload a lot of the little stuff that someone else can do, so that the developers of Beehive can keep working on the really complicated stuff that's well over my head.
The cool thing going forward, we're actually, I know on PCBSD side, we're hoping to incorporate this into the Warden as well. So not only will it do jails, but then you can say, okay, I'd like to make a Beehive instead. And then the cool thing is, if we put it in the back end, like we get the GUI for free.
Exactly.
It's very, very easy to update the GUI to support it as well. And we'll end up with a nice graphical way to fire off VMs.
Yeah, and I even built one of my USB sticks is 32 gigs or whatever, but I built it as a Z pool and set it up so that it's got FreeBSD 10 beta 2 on it, and it can boot and start a Beehive off of that USB stick. So it's
very cool.
A Beehive host entirely contained, a Beehive on ZFS entirely contained in one USB stick.
That's fantastic.
So it's quite fancy.
Anyway,
so it's definitely coming along.
Yeah, it's getting there. I'd say give it a little more time to mature, but if you want to start playing with it now, you can grab the PCBSD image or the FreeBSD images and start hacking around on it.
Yep. He also he says he thanks us for the tip about BSD hacks, Drew Levine's book, but he's wondering if there's any other recommendations for textbooks or stuff for learning FreeBSD, mainly from a sysadmin point of view.
Well, the FreeBSD handbook's the first place I'd start.
Other than the handbook, which is great. There's Absolute FreeBSD, but that's quite dated. Next week, we'll have the author of that and other important BSD books on, and we'll nag at him to do a new edition. He said he wouldn't do a new edition until there was ZFS support in the installer. So I wrote ZFS support in the installer. So now it's his excuse.
He made the deal. It's there now. So now you got to go ahead and cough up the new edition, man.
Exactly.
Very cool.
So hopefully we'll be able to talk about more books, specifically with the kind of practical lab type examples soon. If not, I have some stuff left over, but it's really not in good enough shape. But we'll see.
Okay.
So next, Alex
Next question.
was
Alex.
asking, he says, thanks for producing such a wonderful podcast. And he says he's a long-time Windows and medium-time Linux admin, but he's starting to look at BSD, which is exactly why we do the podcast.
Definitely.
So he says one question is, he's got a few FreeBSD and PCBSD machines, and he's curious about what sort of mail configuration you run on the two of them. What mail servers do you run, what add-ons and all that. Honestly, it would be exactly what you would use on Linux. Postfix or Exim for the mail server, Dovecot for IMAP. They're all pretty much, it's the same app on either side.
That's what we both run, and that it just works.
Yep.
There's a number of great tools out there to help administrate those too, which
and
postfix admin.
And all that stuff is in the FreeBSD package system, the ports tree in the package ng. So, how did that not get a news item that the FreeBSD official package ng repos are up now?
We'll mention it next week.
Yeah, we'll have to do that.
Okay. Very cool. And he also asks about some info for Beehive. So
yes,
again,
we will get a Beehive thing out hopefully before the end of next month.
Okay. And he was asking about public package repositories that support Intel 32-bit or the FreeBSD ones.
The FreeBSD ones will have that, yes. So they do have that. So it's pkg.freebsd.org. There's no website there. You can't just go http pkg.freebsd.org. But if you point your package ng repo at it with the ABI URL, it will work.
Okay.
It uses an SVR record for load balancing and stuff, so that's why why nothing comes up if you just go HTTP. But we'll talk about that more next week. And so yes, all those people that have been waiting patiently for 32-bit package ng, it is here.
There you go. Okay, next up we have Chad, who submitted a tutorial request. Let's see. First off, he's enjoying the show, enjoying the interviews, tutorials. You're welcome. As far as the tutorials go, one thing he's really interested in is automated deployment of FreeBSD and OpenBSD. Oh, how timely. Okay, so let's see here. How do they do it? I assume Netflix has thousands of servers set up. So I mean, we just mentioned the OpenBSD article, so go grab the show notes after the show and take a look at their commit and see if you can find some links to how to set theirs up.
Yeah.
And I just did a talk on this.
On what, Saturday or Sunday?
Yeah. Over at vBSDCon.
And you also, did you do that one at Euro as well?
I did at Euro, yeah. I've been doing that talk.
Videos of both of those should come out. Oh, well, then actually, so the BSDCon one, the video will be up, right?
Yeah, it should be.
Okay.
That's a little older, but if you want to get the audio for vBSDCon when that shows up, you can listen, and the slides are up as well.
Apparently, they're going to make a video by syncing the slides with the audio somehow.
Oh, okay.
They said anyway.
Very cool. But so I gave a talk on that, and you're welcome to go just search that. You'll find it at all these various conferences. And
specifically, he asked about Cobbler, which I know that's what VeriSign uses for their setup, and Puppet, which is what I use. I basically do a fairly basic FreeBSD install using the BSD install tool. That's manual at the moment, but I'll explain why in a second. And then as soon as the system's up, I just do my Puppet bootstrapping off my package ng, start Puppet, and it's all magic from there. We looked at one point of making a boot CD that all it would do is pull down a ZFS send image and write it to the drive and boot it. But it's like, that would always be out of date, and it makes more sense to just install the latest version and then bootstrap off of it.
Yeah, definitely.
And the install for FreeBSD takes so few minutes. It's like
big.
literally
like 3
8 minutes. Yeah, it's like literally like 5 or 6 or 7 minutes. And then my Puppet install on top of that only takes 7 minutes. And 3 of those minutes is like extracting the ports tree and a second copy of FreeBSD for EasyJail. And I could get rid of the ports tree for EasyJail because we don't use ports inside the jails anymore. We all use package ng.
Use packages, yeah.
Yeah, so I could cut 2 or 3 minutes off the install even. So Cobbler and Puppet both work, and then Chris's thing with he's got a whole thing with Pixie Boot and magic happens.
See, we use our PCSys install, which is 100% scripted installer. That's what you do on a PCBSD system.
And I guess the nicest thing about yours is you can do a graphical install and then save that config and use that as an automated install.
Yep. It just generates every front end just generates a .cfg file, and you can take that and throw it on another machine and do the exact same installation again. Yeah. So it's very easy to duplicate.
It's really easy to set up how you can use the very nice GUI to get the system just perfect, and then just say, all right, now stamp this out on 100 machines.
Yep. Well, in good ways like VirtualBox. If you know you got a server coming next week that's got 16 drives in it and you want to set up ZFS, you can just prototype it all in VirtualBox.
Exactly.
And copy the config off, and you're ready to roll the moment it walks in the door.
Yep. Mine's got 34 terabyte drives.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fancy.
Okay.
So the next question was Joshua. He says, he says he thinks he first heard about the podcast on Slashdot, but he didn't really jump on it right away because he mostly uses Mac OS and OpenBSD for a couple of firewalls. But fast forward a few weeks later, and he needs to build a home server for file storage, a little NFS server or whatever. Since the primary role is going to be file sharing, he thought, hey, ZFS. So, that kind of meant FreeBSD. And so he tried that, and while he was doing the research, he came across how robust the ZFS support was in FreeBSD. So he began to look at that as the best choice for his project. And while researching FreeBSD a bit, he rediscovered the podcast and was like, oh, right, I heard about that. I should have watched it back then.
Again.
Yeah. And so he said, thanks, keep up the great work. And he's now using FreeBSD Beta 1 in a VM on his Mac to start to get used to it. And in the next month or two, he should be setting up his home server with it.
Well, check back with us later, Josh. Let us know how that goes, if you run into any problems or if it's just smooth sailing the whole way.
Yeah. We have lots of tutorial ideas, but I'd love to do one just about all the different ways you can configure your ZFS disk layout and what's optimal and drawbacks and sometimes you want the most space or the most redundancy and so on and so on.
Sure. Okay. Next up, we have Craig, who is a longtime Linux fan who has a question. So he said he's been using it Linux since 2008, dual booting between XP, Vista, 7 with Ubuntu, and of course various other Linux distros. He's starting to get curious about the realm of BSD, though. So he's afraid to switch. He's using PCBSD in a virtual box, so you've gotten a little bit of an idea what it's like. However, he still has the fear of switching due to knowing the Linux command line, knowing the GUI tools, knowing how distros handle app updates, etc. What are the main differences at the desktop user interface that I should be expecting to see if I do decide to switch? We kind of answered that a little bit earlier. I mean, if you've been running PCBSD in a VM, the window environments are all the same.
Right, and so if the configuration tool is for the window environment, it'll be the same. It's only if the tool is specific to the Linux distro that it'll be different.
Definitely. So I think if you're looking at PCBSD, for example, the differences will be, okay, we have a different Wi-Fi utility, we have a different add user utility, different utility for package management, like our App Cafe, which will let you browse and search for applications, or we have a graphical package ng manager.
What's the graphical package ng manager called?
It's just called package manager at this point. There's no no branded
so I'm
name
sure
for it.
if you search for package manager in your Linux distro, you would find the same thing as you click, I want this package, it installs it. I want to update all my packages, it installs it. It's fairly straightforward.
That's essentially what it does. Just a tab for updating and a tab for browsing, and then just click and install, and away you go. So I mean, you don't even have to know that it's using packages.
Compared to a couple of years ago, it's a lot closer.
Yeah. So very similar if you're already used to doing that sort of thing.
And the command line, most of the stuff is compatible, right? There's a POSIX standard about what this stuff is supposed to be like. So like LS has almost identical switches.
Sure.
Some FreeBSD commands have more options, and sometimes a Linux command has more options. And very rarely do you get the situation where they're not compatible. I think sort is one of the ones that the Linux one has kind of diverged a little bit. I like the FreeBSD one better, mostly probably because I'm used to it. But DU is the one that I find the biggest differences with.
Sure.
This is the one that always trips me up when I'm trying to do it. Because on FreeBSD, if you want to limit how deep it searches, or how deep the summary comes out as, it's DU minus D 1 or 2 or 3. Whereas on Linux, it's -- max -depth equals, which is a lot more typing.
Sure. But I mean, that's if you're going to be digging
that's
in
tiny
a whole
little
lot
nits,
from the
and
command
it's
line.
The usage error from the utility, or if you really have to at the man page, will help you with those tiny little nits like that. But in the end, I don't think you'll be that surprised.
I mean, you can even run Bash on it if you want. I mean, if that's your shell choice, you got Bash.
If you're used to it, that's
so that's not going to be a huge deal. I guess he's asking too some stuff about jails. Yes. He loves the concept, but he wants a little better explanation of what separates it from VirtualBox.
The biggest difference is that a jail, you're not running the kernel a second time. It's not a hardware virtualization. Right. It's really just a partition or a container rather than virtualization.
Well, I guess a cheroot would be a better example. It's a virtualized cheroot with a network.
Yeah, it's basically a chroot with more restrictions, where you can say, the chroot's only allowed to use this one IP address or these two IP addresses, and it's not allowed to mount anything unless you specifically allow it.
You can't see processes. You can't see things.
You can't see any processes that are running in the host, only inside, and it's got a separate UID space and a couple of things like that.
So the difference would be with a jail. I mean, you're not going to throw boot up Windows in a jail or something. Obviously, it's going to have to be FreeBSD or Linux or something.
You can run most Linuxes kind of.
To the Linux compat layer.
Yeah.
But
or if you're using that Debian KFreeBSD and stuff like that.
But the cool thing is, because it's not virtualizing the hardware, I mean, you can do lots of them with very minimal overhead. Yeah, almost none.
All that you're running an extra copy of is like init in a shell.
So it's not a big deal to run. And then, of course, since it's so cheap, why don't you just throw your mail server in one jail, web in another? I mean, you can just split things up.
One of the biggest differences is all of them are using the original kernel and the original memory space. So that means that all of the RAM is available to all of them as needed, basically. And then there's RCTL. You can actually limit a specific jail if you need to. But I guess the biggest difference is running 10 jails on your host will make the best possible use of the entire system. Unless you specifically limit it, all of the CPUs on the host are available in the guest. And there's absolutely no translation or anything going on there, so you get full machine speed. Whereas in virtualization, normally you're only simulating X number of CPUs and you have it limited. And
Yeah.
you only have so much memory and so on.
It's a little harder because the disk, you got to make a fixed size image usually or something, whereas the jails it can sit on a ZFS data set.
Or even a UFS one.
Access to everything.
It doesn't have to be ZFS, but yeah, you can just sit on any file system. It's basically running a second copy of FreeBSD in a subdirectory.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty much what it is.
But yeah, I guess the biggest difference is, we just talked about that big AMD machine running 48 concurrent builds. Each of those is a jail. So that's running, that one machine is running 48 virtual machines. Not very often would you be running that many virtual machines.
Yeah, definitely.
You would run out of RAM just because, you need to load the kernel and stuff.
And then, of course, you got to figure out how to partition it. Well, let's see. This VM needs to build OpenOffice, so it needs this much. Oh, wait, this one only needs... Yeah, just gets messy very quick.
You can just create and destroy them practically instantaneously.
Yeah, very cheap.
Yep.
Cool. Well, I hope that answered your question there, Craig. And that's the end of the roundup for our questions this week.
Yep.
So, as usual, guys, anything you want to ask us, go ahead and send it in to feedback@bsdnow.tv. You can send in questions, comments, show ideas, etc. We don't check necessarily the YouTube comments, JB comments, Reddit. So if you really want us to see it, please send it in to the feedback@bsdnow.tv address. Or you can try Twitter, and we try and monitor that as well. Yep. But email's definitely preferred. And as usual, we're live every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1800 UTC.
Yep.
So,
and you can join the chat room and then yell at us while we do the show.
Definitely. That's always fun. You look over and go, oh, he's saying something over there.
Yeah, or, someone that was at the conference we were just at saying, yeah, I was there too. And, it was pretty nice to meet you guys and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And thanks to GJ for helping with the show notes and the tutorials and everything.
Mm-hmm. And, so thank you guys for joining us this week. And hopefully you'll be back next. We'll see you then.
Yeah.